Everyone. John McDermott here with the League of Uncommon Men podcast. Today I want to talk about 2 Corinthians chapter 5, and it continues Paul's letter to the Corinthians, focusing on the hope and transformation that believers experience through Christ. Here's an overview of the chapter. In this chapter, Paul discusses the concept of the earthly tent and the eternal dwelling, highlighting the hope and assurance that believers have in Christ. He emphasizes the transformation that occurs in believers through reconciliation with God and the ministry of reconciliation entrusted to them. Paul encourages believers to live by faith and walk in obedience to Christ, knowing that they will one day face judgment and receive their eternal reward. He concludes the chapter by emphasizing the reconciliation between believers and God through Christ and the call to be ambassadors for Christ in the world. So regarding the earthly tent and the eternal dwelling, Paul begins by using the metaphor of an earthly tent to describe our current bodies and the temporary nature of our earthly existence. He explains that as believers, we have a longing to be clothed with our heavenly dwelling, which is our eternal glorified body. Paul emphasizes that this hope gives believers confidence, even in the face of death. Regarding reconciliation with God, Paul highlights the concept of reconciliation and the transformative work of God through Christ. He explains that through Jesus' death and resurrection, believers have been reconciled to God and forgiven of their sins. Paul emphasizes that this reconciliation is not based on our own merits or works, but on the grace and love of God. Regarding the ministry of reconciliation, Paul explains that believers are entrusted with the ministry of reconciliation. He describes this ministry as sharing the message of reconciliation with others and urging them to be reconciled to God. Paul emphasizes that believers are ambassadors for Christ, representing Him in the world and proclaiming the good news of salvation. Regarding living by faith and walking in obedience, Paul encourages believers to live by faith and not by sight. He explains that while we are still in our earthly bodies, we are away from the Lord, but we walk in faith, not by sight. Paul urges believers to live in a manner pleasing to God and to use their lives to bring glory to Him. Regarding the future judgment and eternal reward, Paul reminds believers that they'll one day stand before the judgment seat of Christ. He explains that believers will be rewarded based on their actions in this life, whether good or bad. Paul emphasizes that the love of Christ compels believers to live for Him and to serve others. So to summarize, 2 Corinthians chapter 5 highlights the hope and transformation that believers have in Christ. Paul uses the metaphor of the earthly tent and the eternal dwelling to describe our current bodies and our future glorified bodies. He emphasizes the concept of reconciliation with God through Jesus Christ and the ministry of reconciliation entrusted to believers. Paul encourages believers to live by faith, walk in obedience to Christ, and to serve as ambassadors for Him in the world. He also reminds believers of the future judgment and eternal reward that awaits them. So I hope you'll take the opportunity to read 2 Corinthians chapter 5 in its entirety and see what the Lord is telling you by these scriptures, and I hope it is useful to you and serves you so that you can also become a minister of the gospel. Hope you have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you again soon.